I sat in my garage, surrounded by the familiar smell of oil and metal. The radio hummed softly in the background, and the faint hum of passing cars occasionally filtered through the slightly open garage door. My hands were occupied with the guts of an old engine block, a project I had been putting off for months. It was a Saturday morning, the kind of day when time seemed to move slower, and the world seemed content to move at its own pace. Sarah, my wife, had been getting ready for her meeting with a client since early in the morning. I caught glimpses of her moving through the house, focused and determined. She wore a light gray professional dress, but with just enough softness to make an impression. Her shoes were low-heeled, practical yet elegant. Before she left, she stopped in front of the hallway mirror, adjusting her hair and checking her makeup one last time. As she kissed me, she said, "I might be late today, the client has a big house, a lot of details to talk about." She grumbled some kind of acknowledgement and returned to her work, but something caught my attention. Her perfume wasn't her usual everyday scent, but one reserved for special occasions, dinners, anniversaries. I joked about it, and she smiled, replying, "I need to make an impression," and left. For a while, I got lost in the mechanics in front of me. There's a calmness that accompanies manual labor, something almost meditative. The clinking of tools, the focus on every bolt and screw is a way to silence the mind. But from time to time, that perfume would come back to my thoughts. It was out of place, like a sour note in a melody that was otherwise perfect. By the afternoon, I realized Sarah hadn't sent me any message. She would normally send a quick update, something simple like, "Still here, everything's fine," but my phone remained silent. I convinced myself she was busy, maybe in the middle of an important conversation with the client. I decided not to bother her and instead went to prepare dinner. While searching through the drawers in the bedroom for my old phone charger, my eyes landed on something inside her purse. A small, partially visible box with an elegant design. Curiosity got the better of me, and I carefully took it out to open it. Inside was a red lingerie set, expensive, with the tag still attached. I stood there with the box in my hands, the soft fabric almost challenging me with its presence. It had been a while since we had a romantic getaway. Between work schedules and the routine, intimacy had fallen into a predictable rhythm. She hadn't mentioned buying anything like this, and it wasn't the kind of garment she would just wear around the house. I closed the box, slid it back into her purse, and stepped away. Maybe it was for me, maybe it was something she had planned as a surprise. I decided to wait and see when Sarah finally came home. It was much later than dinner time when she returned, looking tired but curiously radiant. Her hair was messy, her cheeks flushed, and there was a sparkle in her eyes, not from exhaustion, but something else. She dropped her purse, took off her shoes, and collapsed onto the couch. "The client insisted on having dinner," she explained. "We talked about the details at a restaurant after touring the property." She pulled out her phone and showed me pictures of the house, huge rooms, ornate chandeliers, empty hallways. In one of the photos, in the reflection of a large window, I noticed the silhouette of someone, a man with his back to the camera, wearing a light shirt, his hand resting on it. Without changing my tone, I asked, "Who's that?" Pointing. "Oh, the owner," she replied without hesitation. He was showing me the place, pointing out details. It was a plausible explanation. Her voice was firm, her expression calm, but something in the way she answered felt rehearsed, like she had anticipated the question and prepared the answer. Later that night, while Sarah was in the shower, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her purse. The box with the lingerie was still there, carefully hidden. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. Surprises, secrets, they weren't her style. We were practical people, and we both preferred things to be straightforward. The next morning, Sarah left early for her workout. I stayed behind, planning to take care of the garden. On the kitchen counter, I noticed her car key abandoned there. I picked it up, thinking to move her car to make room for a delivery I was expecting later. That day, when I sat in the driver's seat and adjusted the mirror, I noticed something in the back seat. A small plastic container with a white lid, tucked into a corner. Inside were remnants of strawberries with cream. The strawberries were fresh, the cream smeared on the plastic walls. I felt my jaw tighten. Sarah hadn't eaten anything like strawberries with cream in over a year. She was very strict with her diet, almost obsessive, and strawberries with cream weren't exactly a post-workout snack. They were a dessert, a romantic dessert. I stayed in the driver's seat for a long time, staring at that container. It felt heavier than it was, like it carried 1,000 unspoken words. I knew I couldn't confront her, not without more information. Not without being completely sure. Accusing without proof only leads to denials, and denials create walls you can't break down. I left the keys in their place on the counter and continued with my day, but my mind was no longer on the garden or the delivery. It was focused on one objective: to be more vigilant, to gather evidence, to notice patterns I might have overlooked before. I wasn't thinking about asking her anything, not yet. Not until I had a clear picture. Not until there was no room for doubt. But one thing was certain: I needed to watch more carefully, observe the small details, the things one usually overlooks. For now, I had to think, to plan my next move cautiously. In a corner of my garage, covered by a fine layer of dust, sat an old drone I had bought a couple of years ago to film my motorcycle rides on winding roads. It had been an impulsive purchase, and after a few initial flights, it was forgotten among my tools and spare parts. But now, it seemed like fate that I still had it. I cleaned it up, checked the battery, and ran diagnostics on the camera system. Everything was working. The small screen on the remote blinked, showing me the live transmission from the drone's camera. The next morning, Sarah announced another meeting with a client. She wore a fitted gray suit, her hair perfectly styled. Her demeanor was calm and professional. If she was hiding something, she was doing a great job of concealing it. I kissed her on the cheek, wished her good luck, and waited until her car disappeared around the corner. Then, I took the drone, went outside, and launched it into the sky. I followed her car as it drove down the main road. At first, everything seemed normal. She was heading in the direction she had mentioned the night before. But after a few kilometers, she took an unexpected turn and drove down a smaller side road. I lowered the drone slightly, keeping a safe distance. Her car stopped in a small parking lot near a countryside cafe. It wasn't anything luxurious, just a few wooden tables outside under large umbrellas. Sarah got out of the car, looked around briefly, and then walked to one of the tables. I tightened my grip on the controller while adjusting the drone's camera angle. A man approached her, middle-aged, somewhat balding, overweight, with a folder of documents under his arm. They greeted each other naturally and sat down. From their body language, it was clear they were discussing business. There were no awkward touches or conspiratorial glances that suggested anything more. For several minutes, I kept the drone nearby, watching. They spoke occasionally, gesturing with the folder and nodding. Finally, the man stood, shook her hand, and returned to his car. Sarah stayed for a few moments before doing the same. I returned the drone home, my shoulders tense. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe it was just business, but the unease wouldn't go away. That night, while Sarah was getting into bed, I stayed in the garage, staring at the drone. There had to be a better way to track her movements, something more precise. Then I remembered her phone. Sarah had the habit of leaving it charging in the hallway while she showered. I waited for the sound of the water running before taking it. With firm hands, I installed a tracking app. Nothing flashy, just a simple GPS sync disguised as a system update. It took me less than 5 minutes, and when I put the phone back, it seemed untouched. 3 days later, Sarah announced another meeting with a client. This time, I didn't bother with the drone. I opened the tracking app on my laptop and watched her little dot move on the map. At first, everything followed the usual pattern until her car stopped. The location that appeared on the screen was a small hotel on the outskirts of the city. I sat, staring at the blinking D, my jaw clenched. It wasn't the kind of place you would meet a client for a real estate deal. For almost 30 minutes, her location stayed still. Then, suddenly, it moved again, this time toward a familiar location, a luxury suburban house, the kind of place she often showed her clients. That night, Sarah came home with photos on her phone, showing the house in detail. She even played an audio recording of the conversation with the client, clear, professional, and direct. Her story matched the route perfectly, but I couldn't shake the image of the blinking dot sitting at that hotel for half an hour. The third time, I decided to go further. I called Mac, an old friend who worked as a deliverman. We planned everything down to the smallest detail. The next time Sarah mentioned a meeting with a client, Max would pose as a messenger and approach her directly. The plan went exactly as we had designed. Mac found Sarah at the given address and approached her with the pretense of delivering a package. Through the tiny hidden camera in his jacket, I could see the encounter. Sarah handled the situation with calmness and kindness, explaining that he must have gotten the address wrong and offered to help him find the right one. Her composure was flawless, no nervous glances, no awkward explanations. Confident, professional, unshakable. That night, when I watched the footage, I felt like I was going in circles. Every move I made, every angle I tried, she countered with perfectly believable explanations. But something still felt wrong. It wasn't her actions or the words she used, but something deeper, something intangible, a gut feeling that refused to disappear. The days passed, and I grew more uneasy. I kept going over every detail, the perfume, the lingerie, the strawberries, the hotel. Nothing added up, but I didn't have irrefutable proof. It was like chasing shadows, doubting myself at every turn. Everything seemed clean, every detail matched her story, but inside, something still didn't sit right. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I needed to involve someone else, and I already had a plan in mind. I knew I couldn't keep doing this on my own. Sarah was sharp, calculating, always one step ahead. Every time I thought I had her cornered, she managed to turn the situation around, leaving me full of doubts. To get to the bottom of this, I needed real help. That night, in the dim light of my garage, I sat with two of my closest friends. Maki, Tom, and Mac. Maki, a former military reconnaissance officer, was the kind of person who could find a needle in a haystack from a kilometer away. Tom, on the other hand, was a genius who worked as a systems administrator at a bank and had an amazing ability to track information in the darkest corners of the digital world. They were the only two I could trust with something this delicate. We sat on boxes, beer bottles sweating in our hands, while I told them everything I knew, the perfume, the lingerie, the strawberries, the stop at the hotel, and the odd behavior near the bank. Mike listened intently, frowning as he jotted down details on a crumpled piece of paper. "We need to find her weak spot," he said finally, his voice deep and calm. "No one's perfect, Jack. Everyone makes mistakes, even the most careful people slip up sometimes." Tom intervened, tapping his beer bottle with his pen. "You mentioned something about a meeting at the bank, right? She's brought it up more than once. I could look into that, internal records, flagged transactions, anything unusual. Banks are like digital diaries, and I know where to look." Sarah had mentioned the bank meeting weeks ago, seemingly normal, something about mortgage discussions for a client. But now, with everything else, it stood out like a flashing red light. The next day, Tom started snooping. He had a secure system at home, far from prying eyes. Meanwhile, I decided to use another tactic. Sarah had a close friend, Lisa, a cheerful and talkative woman who had trouble keeping secrets. She was smart enough to know when to keep quiet, so I arranged a casual meeting with her at a local cafe. We exchanged pleasantries over coffee until I carefully steered the conversation toward Sarah's work. "Lisa," I said lightly, "Sarah mentioned something about important bank meetings lately, big clients, a lot of paperwork. Has she mentioned anything about it to you?" Lisa hesitated for just a fraction of a second before forcing a smile. "Oh, the usual, boring stuff, mortgages, loans, the typical things any real estate agent handles." Her smile was too tight, her tone too rehearsed. I leaned back, letting the conversation shift to another topic, but I noticed the hesitation in her eyes. Before we left, I handed Lisa a small envelope with a gift card inside, a little incentive to keep her eyes open. "Just keep me updated," I said casually. Lisa nodded, but her fingers trembled slightly as she tucked the envelope into her purse. A few days later, Sarah marked another bank meeting on her calendar, bank, 2 p.m. Mike and I decided to follow her. We parked discreetly at a distance from the entrance, binoculars in hand. Sarah arrived on time, got out of the car wearing a flawless dress that exuded confidence, and walked into the bank without hesitation, disappearing behind the glass doors. For a while, everything seemed normal, until a man appeared from a side entrance, a tall figure in a tailored suit, walking firmly toward a black sedan. There was no exchange with Sarah, no glances, no greetings, but their movements were synchronized, too perfect to be a coincidence. Mike took some high-resolution photos. "That's not a client," he murmured decisively. I felt the same weight in my chest. Whoever that man was, he wasn't there to discuss mortgages. The next scheduled meeting was at a property on the outskirts. This time, the three of us, Mike, Tom, and I, decided to follow her fully. We arrived an hour early and parked under the shade of some trees, out of sight. The house was isolated, quiet, with no lights or movement inside. Sarah arrived at the scheduled time, parked her car, glanced around, then circled the house to enter through the back door. Her movements were quick and deliberate. "She was alone," I whispered. "Mark, wait." 40 minutes later, the same black sedan appeared. The man from the bank got out, adjusted his shirt cuffs, and entered the same side entrance where Sarah had gone. 2 eternal hours passed. No one entered or exited. The air in the car was thick, the silence suffocating. Finally, the door opened, and Sarah came out, pale and tense. She glanced back twice before reaching her car and driving off. The man followed shortly after, but instead of leaving immediately, he stopped beside his car, looked around, and pulled out his phone. Mac took more photos and noted the license plate. Back in the garage that night, we spread everything we had, photos, timestamps, addresses, and observations, across the work table. The evidence painted a picture, but it wasn't complete yet. There was no irrefutable proof, only fragments of something bigger. Sarah's stories were flawless, too well rehearsed, every detail fitting perfectly with her version. Yet, I still felt like something was missing. My intuition told me there was something deeper, something beneath the surface we were still overlooking. Then Max spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Jack, I think I have an idea." I looked at him, feeling a spark of hope rekindle. Mac dried his hands on his jeans and looked at me thoughtfully. "Listen, Jack. I've got a guy in mind. He's like a blogger, but really more of an independent investigator. He has a channel where he digs into complicated stories and uncovers layers in ways most people don't even think about. He's smart, resourceful, and works on a tight budget. I've seen his work before. He's good." The idea of involving someone who could air everything out made me nervous. The last thing I needed was for our personal drama to become a public spectacle, but the reality was we were running out of leads, and Sarah was proving to be an exceptional liar, or at least very good at hiding whatever it was she was doing. "What's his name?" I asked casually. "Next," Max said. "I'll contact him. I'll be vague with the details. If he shows interest, we'll meet." 2 days later, we sat across from Next at a rundown roadside restaurant. He was younger than I expected, probably not over 30, with piercing eyes that seemed to analyze everything. His movements were quick and deliberate, his speech concise and confident. "Listen," he said, leaning over his empty coffee cup. I'm not a miracle worker, but I'm good at what I do. If there's something you missed, any tiny detail you haven't touched on yet, I'll find it. Give me everything you've got, photos, records, recordings, timestamps. I handed him a USB drive with everything we had gathered. By the way, all the evidence, photos, and interesting images of my wife, and anything I can't post on YouTube, you'll find on my Patreon. Nick nodded determinedly, pocketed the USB, and left, leaving us with the smell of burnt coffee and mint rubber. 4 days later, he sent me a message. I found something strange. Call me. When I dialed his number, his voice sounded calm but firm. Jack, there's a photo of the bank in the background. Behind the glass doors, there's a set of keys on a desk. They have a distinctive keychain with the logo of the company your wife works for. He paused, and I could hear him frowning. What does that mean? Those keys weren't hers. They were on the banker's desk, which means someone from her company was also meeting with the banker, not just her. And they don't seem to be a client. Nick couldn't identify the owner of the keys just from the photo, but it was enough to refocus our investigation. The following week, he contacted me again, his tone more urgent. Jack, I've been reviewing the internal appointment records at the bank. Your wife's name doesn't appear anywhere. She hasn't had a scheduled meeting there in the past 3 months. That's impossible, I murmured. And what's more interesting is that there's an employee, I can't say their name yet, who's been receiving encrypted emails where your wife's name is mentioned repeatedly, and there's one word that repeats, trophies. I asked, what does that mean? I'm not sure, admitted Nick. But it doesn't have to do with mortgages or real estate business, that's for sure. The idea was beginning to make sense, and in the worst way. Sarah hadn't been lying about being at the bank, but she wasn't going to meetings with clients. She was going for something else, something secret, something orchestrated. The next day, Nick called again. This time, his voice was calm but with an underlying tension. Jack, I've connected a few more dots. Your wife's boss, Richard Caron, has direct ties to that bank. Officially, he's listed as a financial consultant, but unofficially, there's more. He manages 2 accounts, one official and one hidden. Through that second account, there are large money transactions happening regularly. I leaned back in my chair, his words weighing on me. Every time one of those transactions happens, Nick continued, Sarah has been at the bank within 24 hours, sometimes before, sometimes after. She's not going for mortgages, Jack. She's delivering something or picking something up. My head was spinning. Richard Carlson was a very respected man in the business world, a charming guy who knew how to win anyone over. But behind the scenes, he pulled strings I still couldn't comprehend. And what does that mean? I asked. That your wife isn't acting alone. Carlson is at the center, Nick said. I don't know if Sarah is complicit or if she's being manipulated, but the connection is undeniable. I hung up the phone and stared at the garage floor, feeling as if the weight of the situation was growing. I had all the pieces in front of me, scattered, but I still couldn't see the full picture. Sarah wasn't just meeting clients, she was involved in something deeper, something that crossed boundaries I still couldn't define. If Carlson was pulling the strings, I had to confront him face to face, no games, no formalities. There was no alternative. It was time to find Richard Carlson, and when I did, I wasn't going to be polite. The garage felt suffocating as the 3 of us, Mike, Tom, and I, reviewed piles of photos, printed emails, and Nick's notes under the yellowish light of a lamp. At the center of it all was a man, Richard Carlson. The man who seemed to be the key to this mess. He wasn't just a boss or a businessman. He was something more, something shady. Mike pointed at one of the photos, his jaw clenched. He's very smart, Jack. People like him don't expose themselves. He has bodyguards, a strict schedule, and people who cover his back. We'll need to catch him at a vulnerable moment. He adjusted his glasses. What if we arrange a meeting? Something that looks casual, he suggested. I shook my head. It's too obvious. He'll know something's up before we can say 2 words. If we want to corner him, we need to do it in a way he doesn't expect. We knew that Carlson spent his weekends at an elite private golf club, secure, full of employees who knew not to ask questions. Mike and I rented staff uniforms and pretended to be waiters. The plan was simple: hand Carlson a note directly and lead him to a private place. When the moment came, I approached his table with a silver tray and a folded piece of paper. "Excuse me, sir. Someone asked me to deliver this to you," I said. Carlson barely glanced at the note. His cold, calculating eyes turned to his security team. Within seconds, 2 burly men ushered me off the field. We failed. Back in the car, Max shook his head. He's 1 step ahead, as if he's playing chess while we're playing checkers. Tom, however, didn't give up. "I have a new plan," he said. "What if we use his own arrogance against him? Guys like Carlson always think they're smarter than everyone else." He suggested creating a fake email, supposedly from one of his most important clients, with an urgent subject line requiring a private meeting without security or assistance. It was risky, but our only option. Tom crafted the message with surgical precision, mimicking the tone and style of top-level corporate management. He sent it through an encrypted server, impossible to trace back to us. We set the meeting at a high-end hotel lounge, discreet enough for Carlson not to think anything of it, but also public enough not to raise suspicion. We reserved a private room in advance, dim lights, heavy curtains, and an expensive whiskey decanter on the table. When the door opened, Carlson entered. He wore a pristine suit, but his eyes darted around like a predator, evaluating the ambush. "You're not Mr. Pearson," he said coldly. I stood up and looked him in the eyes. "No, I'm not, but I need to talk to you." Carlson hesitated for a second, then sighed and shut the door behind him. He walked slowly to the chair on the other side of the table and sat down, adjusting the cuffs of his suit. "You have 3 minutes, he said firmly. I spoke calmly but decisively. "I know about the meetings with my wife, I know about the bank, and I know you're hiding something in the safety deposit boxes." Carlson exhaled slowly, leaning back. "Look, Jack, I'm not proud of what happened. Yes, there was something between Sarah and me. It was brief, it was stupid. But it's over now. And whatever's going on now, it's not an affair." I clenched my jaw but remained silent, letting him continue. "I never asked Sarah what she kept in those boxes. Honestly, I didn't want to know, but I saw some things, photos, recordings, documents, things that shouldn't exist, which made me realize she was involved in something much bigger than I thought." His voice softened, almost regretful. "Jack, whatever happens, this isn't just between the 2 of you. It's bigger. You need to be prepared for what you'll find." I nodded slowly. "I need the key, access to the boxes." Carlson shook his head. "I can't help you with that, but I'll give you some advice. When you open those boxes, be ready for the consequences. Because whatever's inside will change everything." He stood up and walked toward the door, but paused before leaving. "Jack, I didn't know you existed when Sarah and what happened. If I had known, it would have been different. I have a wife and 3 kids. I love them more than anything, and what I did haunts me. I'll carry it with me for the rest of my life. If you need financial help with the divorce, I'll make sure it's easy, but keep this quiet, for them." I looked at him, feeling a mix of anger, compassion, and exhaustion. "It's fine," I said softly. Carlson nodded slightly and left, leaving behind the scent of expensive cologne and the heavy weight of what remained unresolved. The deal was clear. On one hand, I saw a man who regretted his actions and admitted his mistake. On the other, an opportunity to secure my financial future for what was to come. But now, I needed to know what was in the safety deposit box, and for that, I'd need a specialist, someone who could handle legal documents and systems. This wasn't over yet. The hum of the fluorescent lights in the bank's security room echoed overhead as I entered. The air smelled of cold metal, and the heavy door of the vault slammed shut behind me with a dull thud. I tightened my grip on the forged authorization and the stolen key from Sarah. The bank employee who was accompanying me, a discreet contact from Nick, gave me a nod before stepping aside. My pulse thudded in my ears as I slid the key into the lock and turned it. The sound of metal scraping metal chilled my blood. The door opened with a muffled creak, and I carefully pulled out a steel rectangle and placed it on the nearby table. The lid opened with a faint groan, and what I saw inside froze my stomach. There were several small sealed plastic bags, each labeled with dates and handwritten notes. Inside them were used condoms, each inscribed with strange phrases like "Best of the Week" and "My Champion." The handwriting was unmistakably Sarah's. My hands trembled as I picked one up and then set it back down as though it burned me. Behind the bags were glass jars filled with various liquids, each labeled with cryptic symbols I couldn't decipher at that moment, but one stood out, a large jar with thick black letters reading "Be Father for Ma's son." Beneath it were a couple of illegible scribbles, initials, and strange symbols. It seemed someone had catalogued everything with obsessive precision, preserving moments, samples, and memories like a scientist. My mind was buzzing with questions, but the answers seemed trapped in the metallic silence of the vault. In one corner of the box was a thick leather notebook with worn corners and smudged ink. I opened it, and my breath caught. Each page contained meticulous notes about men, names, physical attributes, even personal habits. Beside some entries were photos, some very intimate, others taken unwittingly, all incriminating. Page after page repeated the same story, a carefully orchestrated selection process, a methodical system for evaluating and classifying these men as though they were cattle. There were also references to payments, amounts of blackmail, and encrypted codes referring to transactions I couldn't fully understand. Then, I found her page, Richard Carlson's name alongside his photo. There were handwritten notes, control established, threat minimal. It was clear that Sarah had him in her grasp, or at least had involved him in the same dark web she had woven for so many others. I took photos of every document, every jar, every grotesque artifact. My hands shook, and I felt a knot in my chest, but I had to do it. I needed proof. The silence of the vault was suffocating, heavy with the weight of everything I had uncovered. The air was thick and metallic with a hint of decay, reflecting the corruption I had just uncovered. When I finally closed the box and slid it back, I left the security room without saying a word, giving a brief nod to the bank employee before exiting the building. I drove home as though in a trance, my knuckles pale on the steering wheel, those images and notes repeating in my mind like a scratched record. When I finally stopped in the driveway, it was already dark, and the only light in the house came faintly from the living room. Sarah was sitting on the couch with a glass of wine in one hand and her phone in the other. She barely looked at me when I entered. "Where were you?" she asked coldly, not lifting her eyes much. I stood in the doorway for a moment, feeling the weight of everything I had with me. My voice came out firm, but cold. "Sarah," I said quietly, "it's over." Her eyes lifted, narrowing slightly. "What are you talking about now, Jack? Another one of your theories? Another useless accusation?" I stepped toward her, my voice remaining calm but firm. "No, this time, I didn't just see it, I saw everything. I know what's in the box. I've seen the condoms, the jars, the notebook, the blackmail, the photos. How far did you think you could hide it? How far did you think you could go?" The wine glass trembled in her hand, and for the first time, I saw fear cross her face, cracking her mask of calm. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, though her voice wavered. "Enough with the lies," I spat, my teeth clenched. "The condoms, the jars, the notebook, the blackmail, the photos. How long did you think you could keep this hidden? How far did you think you could go?" Her lips trembled as if she wanted to scream, but nothing came out. "You're going to pay for this," she muttered. I lowered my voice, but it was sharper. "I don't need to show you the photos. I'll show them to the judge, to the court. I'll get a court order, and then everyone will see what's in that box." The color drained from her face. She stood motionless, breathing heavily. "Are you done, Sarah?" I said in a calmer voice. "Pack your things and leave now." She stayed there for a moment, her lips trembling as if she wanted to shout or defend herself. But she simply nodded and looked down. She turned around and went upstairs, the sound of drawers opening and closing, the rustling of hangers against the metal rod. Minutes later, she came down with a suitcase in hand and her purse over her shoulder. As she passed me, her heels clicked sharply against the wooden floor, precise like the ticking of a clock running out of time. She stopped at the door, turned slightly, and with a low but cutting voice said, "Do you think this ends here, Jack? This is just the beginning." I didn't answer, I didn't move. She left, slamming the door behind her, the heavy sound final. Her footsteps faded into the darkness, each click of her heels echoing in my head like the hammer of a judge's gavel. Sarah was gone, but the chaos she left behind was just beginning. The first step was hiring a divorce lawyer, someone capable of handling the magnitude of what I was about to unleash. I needed someone relentless, shrewd enough to dismantle the web that Sarah had created. That's when I found David Clark, a former prosecutor famous for being relentless in the courtroom and for his ability to dismantle even the most complex webs of lies. Sitting across from him in his office with glass walls, I told him everything: the photos, the jars, the notebook, the bank vault records. David examined the evidence in silence, occasionally shaking his head. "Honestly, Jack," he said finally, looking me in the eyes, "this is the worst I've seen in 2 decades. But it's also conclusive. There's no way she's getting out of this clean. We need to move fast, and through legal channels." David set everything in motion immediately. First, he discreetly filed the divorce petition so that Sarah wouldn't find out ahead of time. Then, he filed a precautionary measure to freeze all joint accounts, credit cards, and assets. Within hours, all shared financial resources were locked down. I knew Sarah wouldn't stay quiet, and I was right. The messages started pouring in that same night, filled with accusations, threats, and demands, written in fury. "You can't do this to me. It's illegal. You'll pay for this." I didn't respond. Each word she sent was archived by David. Sarah didn't limit herself to direct threats. She also went public, writing to mutual friends and even relatives, claiming that I was abusive, controlling, and emotionally unstable. But David had already anticipated this. He prepared a concise and professional statement explaining the situation clearly and sent it to our close circle. He attached only the key evidence, the bare essentials to help them understand the gravity of the matter, without exposing the full horror of what I had found. The reaction was immediate. Friends who had been hesitant distanced themselves from Sarah, and relatives who had adored her stopped answering her calls. The evidence was too compelling to ignore. With the legal process underway, David pushed to get a court order to access the safety deposit box, this time under judicial supervision. The request was granted, and a date was set. On the agreed day, I found myself again in that same sterilized vault, now accompanied by David, a judicial officer, and a forensic expert. They opened the box, revealing its grotesque contents under the cold light of the room. Every bag, jar, and page of the notebook was catalogued, photographed, and recorded as evidence. The forensic expert confirmed the authenticity of everything. Nothing had been altered or fabricated. Every fingerprint, every ink stroke pointed back to Sarah. When the judge saw the evidence during the hearing, the room fell into silence. The photos, the jars, the notebook, it was all too overwhelming, too surreal. Sarah sat to the side, pale and motionless, as each item was displayed. Her lawyer tried to argue that there had been manipulation, claiming I had planted everything, but the forensic analysis categorically refuted that. David was methodical in his questioning, leading the judge and jury step by step through every detail, every timestamp, every interaction, leaving no room for doubt. Sarah had not only broken every marital vow, but she had also committed morally reprehensible acts. The verdict came swiftly. The court ruled in my favor on all points. It was determined that Sarah was guilty of emotional and moral cruelty, and her financial claims in the divorce were dismissed. She received no alimony, no monetary settlement, nor access to shared assets. All accounts were placed under my control. In addition to her financial ruin, Sarah's social life crumbled. Rumors followed her wherever she went. Friends avoided her, colleagues avoided eye contact, and her professional reputation was shattered. During all of this, I kept my word to Richard Carlson. His name was carefully removed from all the evidence presented to the judge. No matter what his level of involvement was, we kept his identity protected from the public eye. In exchange, Carlson kept his promise. Shortly after the verdict, a substantial sum was deposited into my account, enough to cover all the legal expenses and a little more. He wasn't an innocent man, but at least he kept his word. The day the process concluded, I left the courthouse feeling like something heavy had been lifted, even if just a little. The legal battle was over, but the damage had already been done. My marriage, my trust, my sense of stability, it was all reduced to ashes. David shook my hand firmly before leaving. "You did the right thing, Jack. Don't regret it, but someday, you will." Back home, the silence was overwhelming. Sarah's absence was both a relief and a void. The house felt bigger, more desolate. I poured myself a drink, sat in the chair by the window, and watched the night. Sarah had lost everything, her reputation, her financial stability, her control, but I had lost something too, the certainty of ever fully understanding the person I once shared my life with. Carlson's money was enough that I would never have to worry about finances again, but it wasn't about that. It was about closing this chapter, finally walking away from the shattered remnants of our story. As Carlson had promised, he transferred a significant amount to my account, enough to cover all the legal fees and secure my financial future. The storm had ended, but the scars it left would last forever. Story 2. I met my wife while I was working a job in my chosen field, but it was lower paying than I would have wanted. It wasn't too shocking because I was a dejected millennial who had grown up in this economy, so I was just happy to find something that could pay me. When I was getting coffee, I bumped into her, and we got to talking. I know it sounds a little corny, but the two of us did hit it off right away. After talking in line for a bit, we exchanged numbers, and then went out on a date. It was one of those whirlwind romances where everything happened all at once. I think maybe the fact that it happened so fast blinded me to any red flags there could have been in the beginning. After about a year, we were getting married. I proposed out of the blue. I don't know why I rushed it, maybe it was the honeymoon phase. But we married in a small ceremony, and she moved from her apartment to my modest one-room apartment. Now, I never had a lot of money. My family was lower middle class, and so was my ex-wife's family, so it wasn't like the two of us didn't come from a similar environment. We did want to build a secure life, but if it didn't happen right away, that was fine. Things like this did take time, after all. Get-rich-quick schemes were exactly that, they were schemes and didn't work. For the first year, things seemed good, and it was like we were on the same page. Then, my wife started to appear as if she were disillusioned with the life we were building. Suddenly, the apartment wasn't good enough, and nothing I did seemed to be good enough. I wasn't making the right amount of money, and we couldn't do anything romantic because of the lack of income. Just about anything that cost money was a concern. Her biggest gripe was that I didn't earn enough money, not her, me. She worked full-time as well, but since I was the husband, I should be the one who was providing more of the money to the relationship. It's a shame that I tried, but I was still deeply in love with this woman. I worked longer hours and put away as much money as I could. When this was happening, I was exhausted all the time. My wife would start complaining about how I never had any time for her, even though I was working overtime for her. The longer it went on, the less I wanted to do it anymore. So, I realized something was going to have to change. I planned to talk with my wife and see if we could try to work things out. If I spoke with her, then certainly she would be able to see my point of view, right? At least, I thought this would be the case. So, I decided to come home early one day to speak with her. However, when I got home and looked for my wife, I found her in our bed with some other guy. She screamed, and I just turned and went into the kitchen. I heard movement from our bedroom, followed by the slamming of the front door. My wife came in, asking what I was doing here. My response was to ask her what she was doing with some other guy in our bed. She claimed it didn't mean anything, so I asked how long it had been going on. My wife admitted it had been going on for the past 6 months. So, for half a year, she had been lying to me. I asked how they met, and she said they met on a social media site. Honestly, I didn't care about anything else she had to say after that. Once I knew she was cheating on me, it was like the wool had been pulled from over my eyes. I was able to see all the red flags I initially missed, and I knew there was only one step ahead of us we could take. It had to be a divorce. There was no other way. She changed her tune right away when it became clear I wouldn't change my mind and take her back. So, once I said it was over, she packed her things and left. From there, we went forward with the divorce. My wife wanted to make it official so she could go be with her affair partner. Over time, I came to find out that the affair partner was quite rich, and once I found that out, the pieces started to fit into place. My wife, or now ex-wife, had always wanted to live a far better life than what I was able to provide. Right now, it was like she wanted to get one of those get-rich-quick schemes, and if you know anything about them, you will know that they do not work, no matter how much you want them to. By getting involved with a rich guy, she did accomplish her goal, so I guess there was that. But it still didn't mean it would work out. Once the divorce was final, my ex moved in with the guy and started an official relationship with him. I tried my best to push her out of my mind and focus on rebuilding my life. The first step was to stop focusing on work so much. I could still work, but also enjoy my life. By doing this, I was able to pay more attention to my hobbies and just the little things that I used to enjoy in life. A few months after the divorce, my ex-wife got into contact with me. She called me from one of her friend's phones since I blocked her main number. Once I answered, my ex started crying about how her new boyfriend had dumped her after 6 months. There went her backup plan. Much to my amusement, my ex had always wanted something more in life, but she had never been willing to work hard for it. This was reality slapping her in the face, and I'm not going to lie, I was loving every moment of it. I don't care if it had been petty of me because I had worked myself like a dog to make my wife happy, only to have it blow up in my face. It was clear my ex was contacting me to get some pity or something along those lines. At least, it was the only thing I could think of. Whatever the reason, she was looking in the wrong place for it, and I told her as much. I do wonder if I reacted differently if she would have tried to ask if she could stay with me or give us another chance. Honestly, I had no idea because as soon as I brushed her off, she started shouting and then hung up on me. If hanging up on me was supposed to hurt, then this was one of the best punishments I had ever received because I didn't want to talk to her anymore anyway. Through the grapevine, I heard that my ex-wife showed up at the guy's house and tried to get him to take her back. It nearly ended up with her getting arrested in the process. My ex clearly couldn't let go of this guy because he was her one chance at getting rich quickly. Hey, if she wanted to waste time going after him, then so be it. Since I kicked her out, she was no longer my problem. The story highlights the challenges of financial stress and the strain it can put on a relationship. It also sheds light on the consequences of unrealistic expectations and the pursuit of quick riches, as seen in the narrator's ex-wife's actions. The narrator's reaction to the infidelity and subsequent breakup is understandable, given the circumstances. Overall, this story serves as a cautionary tale about the importance of communication, shared goals, and trust in a relationship. It also emphasizes the need for self-care and personal growth in the aftermath of a difficult breakup. The story highlights the challenges of financial stress and the strain it can put on a relationship. It also sheds light on the consequences of unrealistic expectations and the pursuit of quick riches, as seen in the narrator's ex-wife's actions. The narrator's reaction to the infidelity and subsequent breakup is understandable, given the circumstances. Overall, this story serves as a cautionary tale about the importance of communication, shared goals, and trust in a relationship. It also emphasizes the need for self-care and personal growth in the aftermath of a difficult breakup. Let her be her AP's problem or whatever other guy she ends up stringing along. I've moved on in my life. The future may seem a little uncertain, but the one thing I am sure of is that my ex is not going to be a part of it under any circumstance.